On this computer. Okay, we are live. We'll do it live. Um, welcome, everyone. Introduction, blah blah blah. Right, with Samuel Barnes. Everyone knows him on this channel, so we don't need the big long introduction. Um, we're just gonna talk about. You've written a book, another book, called Attention, and we're gonna talk about that and probably just whatever else. We were talking just off off camera about how the internet is devolving into a kind of slop machine. I feel like that's a very kind of it's a good theme for the topic of the book anyway. But yeah, I was saying it's slot Twitter's a slot machine. I'm not particularly impressed by Substack. It's a good blogging technology, but the notes, I feel like it's MySpace 2.0. It's just a new MySpace. Um,
Yeah,
I feel like it's a stagnation. There's a stagnation going on of the
yeah,
of the internet. Whereas like a few years ago when I kind of met you and other people that were that were doing like self-publishing and YouTube, I feel like I felt like a little bit of a renaissance of media or
right.
something. Now I feel like it's very stagnant and I get very irritated with it and I don't feel the algorithms are very well designed to give any attention towards towards like anything interesting. And I even see myself having the same effect. Like I see myself sometimes like four tabs open and I'm watching an interview and I switch to something else and I switch and I see
Yeah,
myself being caught into it. So I'm not like judging people without reflecting on my own how it affects me too. But yeah, what do you think? I mean, do you agree? Is the internet going through a bad time, a stagnation? What's the
yeah. I'm not. I think it's many factors together. I mean, one of the things we mentioned when we were talking was the fact that, um, well, what was called Twitter is now called X and all that sort of stuff. But the fact that you go on there and it seems to just want to show you AI videos or just show you videos in general, it's become like TikTok for some reason. And then Substack, at least the notes feature, I know the actual sharing essays and stuff feature is pretty good. The kind of email newsletter kind of feature is really good. But a notes started off as pretty cool. It kind of felt like how Twitter was in like 2016 almost, like where it was mostly like text with some images and there was actual engagement. Um, yeah, I'm not sure. I think it's a confluence of technology. I don't know, like uncool people like Elon Musk getting their hold on, getting their grubby mitts, and I don't know, taking a. Well, I guess I don't know. My view on ideological free speech has definitely changed. If complete untrammeled free speech just gets us slop videos pushed to every eyeball, then maybe
mm,
it's time for a bit of authoritarianism. But like, but it's clear, like it's obvious. Like I remember, like not even that long ago, like probably like 3 or 4 to 5 years ago, Joe Rogan, like that, the Joe Rogan show is still kind of like a big deal. Like it would be it's a huge thing to get on there. It's like a hugely positive thing for everyone who goes on there. Clips were reposted. The subjects that were talked about were always talked about in those kind of short form intellectual spaces. But now it's like Joe Rogan feels like a place where people go to do damage control. And that's obviously because of his connection
yeah,
to
good. It's a good.
whatever's gone on with Trump, let's be honest. But
Yeah.
also, yeah, that's lost its cool. The technology is not linking together the way it was. And I think there's something strange going on there because on the other side, in that really cool time where we did make lots of connections, I don't know about you, I'm sure it's the same. All those connections I made and have, they're still on the go, just beneath the surface. Like it's weird how uh, I don't want to compare us to like the monks returning to tradition, but I'm emailing people now. I'm doing emails again. It's like for us being trad is being in the 90s and emailing people and stuff.
Mm. Yeah, it's
But you
funny.
can't. I don't know. It's just like I don't know. It doesn't feel like the public forum aspect of X or Substack is
Mm.
really there because it's been invaded so quickly. And even like, YouTube, I don't know. I've I've got a very small but a very engaged audience that generally gives some good quality content, but like get comments and stuff. But generally, that space is like kind of starting to be like a lot of the comments are just like trash stuff. It's not even
Mm,
you used to be able to curate like a high quality experience on the internet,
mm,
but you can't really do that anymore. I don't feel not in a public forum. You have to do it in private channels, I feel.
mm.
Um,
Yeah, 100%.
and
It's fu-
maybe this funnels into the topic of the book, but
uh,
the reason for this is because there is a very important commodity for the coming era, which is attention.
yeah. Well, we'll get to the book more directly soon, but I just have a few thoughts about the internet. It's like um damage control is a very good description. I feel like and I do feel like that is motivated a bit by the disappointment of Donald Trump and MAGA, because the sort of rebellion against the sort of liberal democratic censorship, and that was a real thing, um, which ranges from everything to, the American government asking Mark Zuckerberg to delete things to cancel culture to all this stuff. Like it's kind of the whole sort of sensorial package that emerged from like 2015 onwards, like the kind of rebellion
Mhm.
against that with Trump, and then you have this disappointment, and I do feel like there's a lot of damage control going on right now in Twitter. This fixation that the MAGAs have with Europe and like sharing images and talking about Europe as if Europe's this like collapsing place and it's just overrun by immigrants and
And
everything's
as
going.
if there's one European culture, one European people, one European country.
uh,
Like that's obviously not true.
yeah. But before Musk,
I mean,
I
American geographical ignorance on full display once again. Like, talk about the
mm.
failure of the education system.
Yeah. And it's funny because before Musk, I used to see constant videos of like these homeless cities in California, or like people on drugs, and there was a lot of awareness about the whole opioid crisis in the Midwest, and then like it's like overnight almost all of that was just disappeared, and then there's a fixation on what's going on in Europe. Doesn't to say there's a lot of problems in Europe, but it was a kind of peculiar fixation, and it was definitely a deflection away from the incapacity for the Trump regime to actually address these problems properly that they were saying they were going to address. So there was a kind of new kind of censorship which emerged immediately, taken from the old censorship, and that was part of the disappointment for me. But anyway, um, yeah, okay. Well, maybe we'll
Well,
get into the book.
when
And I
it
sh
comes to Trump, you either die the hero or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain. And
Yeah.
who knows how history could have been slightly different if he hadn't turned his head those few inches on that fateful day.
That keeps me up at night because if he was killed, I just think the whole trajectory, everything would have been very different. Uh, yeah, 100%. But I always remind people that he's 80, or he's like nearly 80.
Well,
Like,
talking about damage control, it feels like the whole generation of boomers is trying to do damage control before they hit the bucket,
yeah, 100%. 100%. It's boomer damage control. And I do feel like a lot of
One
this,
last war before we die.
it won't be them fighting, you know.
Yeah, well, once again, right? Yeah.
Uh, um, I like even some of these sort of podcasters that emerged within this kind of COVID epoch and the kind of woke epoch, who's the two English guys?
Oh my God.
Uh,
Trigonometry.
Trigonometry. That's it. Like, there's so much damage. Like, they're a good damage control podcast. They have some interesting conversations, but it is damage control at this point. And
Only one of
uh,
them's English, by the way.
yeah, because he's like Russian originally, right?
He's Russian, yeah.
Uh, but and the other guy's Venezuelan originally, actually. So neither of them are like
Oh, is
technically.
he really? Wow, he's incredibly uncool for a Southern American guy.
Yeah, he's very nerdy.
Usually they've got a bit of mojo, a bit of pizzazz about them, but
Um, yeah, but there you go. That's what's happening. But anyway, let's get into the book. So it's obviously like attention is the main theme, and obviously it's attention economy and the internet, all this stuff. But you do also have a Schopenhauerian kind of theoretical backdrop for this.
yeah.
So. that was new to me because I've never read Schopenhauer. I know almost nothing about him or his theories. I only see I've heard he's a pessimist. That's the only thing I've ever heard about him. So I was like
Right.
really going into this very blind. But like I suppose like what's the because there's so much to say about attention and the attention economy, but like what's the uniquely Schopenhauerian
Yeah.
interpretation of that? Like how do we get
Yeah.
into that?
Great, really good question. Yeah, attention is a very amorphous thing. We know it's important for what's happening right now and is going to happen, but you're right, actually, especially for your audience, it'll be useful to link it to the philosophical underpinnings. So, um, obviously, my previous book was about the point of philosophy and the limits of philosophy off the back of Hume, who is one of the, definitely in the school of British empiricism, one of the, one of the kind of originators of that. So this time I'm kind of looking at something from the opposite side. So this is very definitely in the continental kind of lineage of thinking. And obviously, you can't do anything continental without talking about Kant. So, you know, Kant's critique and his points about the critique, which are actually relevant to Hume and their school, because it's talking about, okay, what can we know um, beyond the phenomena of empiricism, right?
Hmm.
And that's kind of where continental philosophy starts from. So it's kind of saying, okay, these senses are diseased. We're kind of, where I came from, which is skepticism and that sort of stuff. We're asking, okay, what can we actually know? And also, what thing in itself underneath the phenomena can we know? And that's kind of where Kant is. So if you have a familiarization of
Hmm.
Kant, you'll enjoy this book a lot more. But I don't feel like you need it for that for this book. You don't need, and again, you don't need a familiarization with Schopenhauer. Even in fact, one of my arguments in the book is that you're probably better if you don't. I'll talk about that in a minute, but the reason is that Schopenhauer presents a solution to the Kantian problem of okay, we maybe agree that there's an a priori space and time, but underneath these phenomena, how can we know a thing in itself, right? How can we get to the noumenon, as he says? And Schopenhauer's answer to this is through the will, right? So Schopenhauerian will, um, and what that is obviously will is manifest in many ways. Most notably and obviously and most important to us is in the body, right? So your brain is some sort of manifestation of a will to cognate, a will to think. My hands are some sort of manifestation of the will to grasp. Your feet are some sort of manifestation of a will to walk. Your mouth is a manifestation of a will to consume, to eat, blah blah blah, so on and so on, right?
Hmm.
Um, but basically, Schopenhauer's conclusion from this, and he's very much trying to find a solution to this Kantian problem, is that his assertion is that the body is the only thing in itself that we can know by virtue of us being that
Hmm.
body, right?
Okay.
So that the only like actual experience beneath phenomenon that we touch is whatever the actual like what that actually means is you can debate that, but that's kind of his main assertion. And he talks a lot about nature and these sorts of things off the back of that. Also, Schopenhauer's concept of the will goes a bit further than biology. He would say that even the force that pulls a stone to the earth, what we would call gravity, is some kind of manifestation of this underlying will,
Hmm.
which he calls, is in German, it's a bit more confusing, but at least in English, he says it's an etiology of changes. Will is a way of us being able to explain change, which actually, if you think about it, is kind of an answer to some of the Hume problems, where he's trying to say, okay, we can't observe any of these causes and effects, right?
Okay.
So
Interesting.
hopefully that is a interesting kind of philosophical
Yeah.
foundation
I
of
mean,
the
quick basic
yeah.
question. Maybe like this is like first class on Schopenhauerian theory question. Is so the
Uh-huh,
will
uh-huh.
so like the will for Schopenhauer? It's the body is really important. It's an embodied kind of. Uh.
So most of the examples he gives of the will's operation are through biology. So the
Okay.
human body, but also in nature, in plants, and those sorts of things. But he does extend it's a metaphysical concept, the will. It's a metaphysical assertion that,
Hmm.
okay, change exists, therefore there must be some kind of underlying driving force. So his will, his at least his definition extends into even what we would call an inanimate thing, whatever forces are
Okay.
pulling them to be whatever shape they are, or what
Ah,
gravity is pulling them, whatever chemical reactions are happening, and those sorts of things as well.
sure.
Um, so in that sense, it's a very all-encompassing thing. But um, one of the benefits from it being such a wide-ranging concept is you can go a lot of different directions with it, and many
Yeah,
people
yeah.
many people have
So
basically.
it's not like, oh, I want to be a doctor. I'm going to study to be a doctor. It's more like it's something which involves the entire being, the unconscious, the biology, the chemical. Like, it's something which is
Yeah,
well much deeper than like a kind of rationalized
right. And
desire for something, right?
actually, yes, I wouldn't connect it with the necessarily with the idea of desire. And in fact, Schopenhauer very much like, because Nietzsche really subscribes to Schopenhauer, and you get much more value
Yeah.
from Nietzsche's work if you have read Schopenhauer, to be honest. He is very much a determinist in the same vein as Nietzsche.
Hmm.
The
Okay.
whole thing that willed you to be a doctor was there all along, and it was your destiny to actually be a doctor. It's
Okay.
actually almost got nothing to do with any sort of like individual brilliance or something like this. It's like
Okay.
it was the will's will. He actually says this. He says it's the will's will to be the way it is. Like,
Yeah.
and actually, to continue from that is that I think yeah, like Hume, lots of academics they just like oh he's a skeptic and he's an empiricist and that's definitely true, but you miss a very important subtext to his writing, which is all about kind of the melancholy that comes from philosophy and philosophizing and being a skeptic, and actually what we should do with that. He didn't write very much on this, but other people like Donald Livingston have written amazing books on this, and also my book covers this topic. But Schopenhauer also is, you can if you have some of the sacred cows of philosophers, where they want to look for things in nature, like some sort of immutable human rights or equality and these sorts of things. It's probably going to make you feel pretty pessimistic if you look at the determinism and
Hmm.
like brutality of nature that Schopenhauer puts forward. But my spin on it is actually it's the sort of he's definitely got an undercurrent of gratitude, like a thankfulness that we are able to experience the will in such a caustic way through being our own bodies. And actually, who you are is who you were always meant to be. And there's sort of a gratitude for life there as well. I say much more about
Huh.
this in my book, but that's kind of the gist of it. And that's kind of my disagreement with the academic spins you'll get on Schopenhauer as well. So
Okay.
actually, in fact, I would recommend this book for people who haven't read Schopenhauer,
Yeah,
probably
yeah.
even more so than those who have already done a course on him, to be honest.
Yeah, I agree because I think when you get a kind of academic introduction to a philosopher, I think ironically, it's meant to not give you a kind of distorted or biased perspective, but often it actually does. It's actually somewhat more useful to like learn about Plato through some weird niche angle or learn about Schopenhauer through some weird niche angle that no one's thought of before, you know. So I
Yeah.
appreciate that kind of way of
And then
thinking.
because then you confront things like the allegory of the cave as they actually are. You don't confront them as, oh, this is the starting point of this philosophical thread,
Yeah.
and you're thinking about later and how that influences that. So you actually kind of approach it on its own terms. And I think I was
Mm.
I was kind of glad I had an opportunity to do that show with Schopenhauer because I never studied him in any academic capacity.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
when I read the World as Will and Representation, both volumes for this. Yeah, I'm very grateful that I didn't have that. But then, reading after the fact and saying, "Oh, he's the pessimist of philosophy," it's just like, well,
Mm.
you know, you tell a vulnerable undergrad that they're going to be sad after reading something, and it's just, it's like then you are determined, right? It's going to happen, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But I was sort of thinking of kind of he's German, obviously, and I was kind of fitting him into the sort of category of at the time like late 19th and early 20th century sort of vitalistic thinkers like Nietzsche, Schopenhauer, Spengler. That there's a kind of similarity in the three insofar as that they do sort of shift their focus maybe a little bit away from things like transcendence towards sort of physiology or nature or Spengler's orgum organism, that history is an organism, and there is a kind of more of a focus on determinism because of that. Also, embodiment, determinism, and life cycles and things like this, I suppose.
Yeah.
There is a similarity. So I was, so that's because I have a little bit of knowledge of Spengler, and I was thinking about Spengler recently, and I was obviously I've read a good bit of Nietzsche, so I was kind of categorizing Schopenhauer more in that camp rather than like a
Definitely, yeah.
pessimist, more like a kind of vitalist, determinist, something like that. I don't know.
I call him a realist. I think he's like, which is very interesting because Schopenhauer, although he's very opinionated and set on what he thinks he does know, and this is where you get the very sure metaphysical assertion of a will. I think that as a foundation actually gives you a lot of directions you can go in.
Yeah, yeah,
Many, like more people than we admit, have been influenced by his thinking. Like obviously Nietzsche is a prime example, but also a German painter also carried a copy of
oh,
World as Will and Representation in his knapsack when he was on the front.
interesting. Okay. And like, what would be? I mean, what? Obviously, like you can only speculate, but like, what would be the kind of reason to have Schopenhauer in your pocket if you're in World War One? Like, how would that help you?
I mean, he was kind of a weird guy anyway. I don't know
Mm.
what we can say. Like, you have to be a pretty weird guy to be into Schopenhauer to start with. So I don't want to explain his motives. I have no idea.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Fair, fair, fair. Okay.
But if you look at some of the later stuff, a lot of the mid 20th century German stuff includes a lot of the word will, a mention
Yeah.
of the will, triumph of the will. It comes up a lot, and I think it was an influence, for better or
Mm.
for worse.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. And I think that had a lot to do with, that's kind of getting off topic a little bit, but I think that had a lot to do with World War One, because I think in World War One, the sort of, so to use a kind of analogy from military history, the last war that really I think was a proper representation of human will was the Prussian-Franco War,
Mm,
1870, because once World War One happened, like the sort of sense of like this kind of Napoleonic idea that if you have intelligent leadership, courage, and discipline, that you can overcome anything. That was a kind of
mm,
Napoleonic, and if you look at military theory, like Clausewitz and so forth, which responded to the Napoleonic Wars, that was very much an assumption. Whereas in World War One, because it was just machine guns and shells and trenches, that really was put in a question mark was put over that. It was like maybe it's not really like the human will became less important, and the capacity to just like have industrial capacity to just bomb, 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 bomb became more important. So I think there was a kind of crisis of human agency which came out of
yeah.
well, one. That's something I want to write more about in the future. And so I don't know maybe if that influenced
And I
if
mean, it's a turn that happened in, I mean, economics and spirituality, all these sorts of things.
mm,
I think, I don't know, probably one of the biggest problems with modernity as such is that you have this shift from, okay, how can we make the best type of one thing, and how can we be virtuous while we do it? It's a shift from that into viewing humans as fungible, countable units of either war or economics and these sorts of things.
mm.
And yeah, I don't know. The production line shares a lot in common with the trenches, to be honest.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, that's this kind of contradiction of modernity, which is constantly going on, which is on one level, you have individualism and a sense of rational agency. And it's like, okay, well, that means I have more control, I have more agency. But on the other level, you have this overwhelming system of economics and technology, which is at the same time crushing that agency. So it's like you have these two chronic, relatively perhaps incompatible um, forces that are constantly attacking each other. And I really do think a lot of ideological tension that we see in the modern world, particularly in the 20th century onwards, mid late I don't know, late 19th, 20th century onwards, really is centering around that. It's like, how do we respond to this overwhelming sort of global system of technology and economics, which
Well,
is just crushing us, you know?
and let me give you an answer that segues into what I want to talk about next, which is
Yeah.
that, okay, the internet is dead or dying in terms of being a human experience. and we've been in this trend towards mechanization, but then a shift to no longer, your labor being the most valuable thing about you. Then it was the
Mm,
your personal data and your ability to consume that was the most valuable thing about you. And so culture's become more robotic, but has expanded and expanded. And there's also become a certain flavor in line with demographics as well. But basically, the place of the human, and particularly, you know, the the meaningful human experience has been crushed and crushed and crushed and crushed. It was, at least there was value to your labor, there was value to you being from a certain country, from a certain background, these sorts of things. And it's
yeah.
been crushed and crushed and crushed. Now no longer going to the academy makes you even useful for the system. It just makes you in debt and these sorts of things. And it's been crushed to such an extent that I would go so far to say, especially with the emergence of mid-level knowledge creation through large language models, that the most valuable thing that human beings are producing right now is their own attention.
Mm, yeah, yeah.
And so that's why I called the book Attention. But it's also where that's my jumping off place from Schopenhauer's assertion that the only thing in itself that we can know is our own bodies. And I would ask that, okay, what tells you the most about where the will that is directing that body, what is its telos is? What tells you
Mm,
where its telos is? Now, that is probably the things you give your attention to, right? Now that can be the attention that you would use your hands to use. It would also be the attention that your eyes give out, this invisible philosophical like production your body does. Because that seems to be what capital has zoomed in on as being the most valuable thing. But I think we should view it in the same way, because right now, in terms of being philosophical subjects, that is the value that we have. And so in this new era, I think we've gone from, we had the Bronze Age and the Iron Age, blah 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 blah,
mm,
and then we had the Information Age. That was where your data and your ability to consume, based off that data being predictable indicators of what you would consume, that has shifted to now actually the individual unit of your attention that most people actually give through their smartphone, by the way. That is probably the most valuable unit that capital is harvesting from us right now. And then this is where it becomes a philosophical problem and challenge, is that, okay, how much of our attention do we give to this beast of capital that we've created? And how much can we pull back for ourselves? Or do we try and completely save ourselves from it being harvested from capital? And do we revert to human means? This is a further question that I kind of invite your thoughts on. But
yeah.
that is the question of the book. And off the back of that, I ask that, okay, what implications does that have for desire? But obviously, most importantly, I would say probably is sex, because it ties into eugenics. It most
Mm,
certainly ties into the current situation we have with the global succubus that is pornography. It most certainly ties into any ideas that we might have about utopia, because the arising cybernetic utopia just seems to be a place where we give our attention to capital in return for sustenance and perceived
mm.
meaning. Yeah, there's a lot of directions we can go with it.
Well, I just to pick up on the economic stuff because I think that's an important observation you made where the kind of value of labor, right? Like Marx called it the the labor theory of value. It's like what's valuable is human labor. And Marx was kind of a humanist in many ways, I think. I think he thought that really what's essentially valuable underlying all these numbers and prices that we understand objects through is like the human there using his energy and time to build this thing. And I think what's interesting about like the attention economy and the digital capitalism is that our labor in the sense of like the kind of humanistic sense of like my skill, my craft, my capacity to learn and cooperate with others is so dissolved into what's important now is like I'm just kind of pacified person who's like, the important thing is that you get my attention and that I pay for things and I consume them, right? There's a real pacification and a kind of real like sort of undermining of any sort of humanistic integrity, which you
Yeah.
see within digital capitalism. I think that's definitely something which hasn't been kind of realized or accepted yet to a
And
certain extent.
like capital in the technical system doesn't need sustenance in the same way we need sustenance.
Mm,
Um, and it doesn't, and actually it's kind of a lot of it is in a strange way aligned with doing what we want. Now, it's obvious that what we want is not always what we need. This is one of the other big problems I talk about with desire in the book, like especially when it comes to pornography, men want a certain thing or they want a huge variety of many things all the time.
mm,
And capital can give us that. Capital can give us that. And all it wants is our attention. And I can see a future because I think a lot of the people harping on about universal basic income would probably be okay with this. Is I can see a future where it would be worthwhile for, especially if energy costs are kept low enough, that a universal basic income system could be implemented where what we'd have to do is we'd have to give a certain amount of attentive feedback into the recursive cybernetic system. Now, what form that takes, I don't know. You can invent your own Black Mirror scenario for whatever form that
mm.
takes, but that's all that you provide. That's of value that would be useful and worthwhile. So I can see how that would happen.
Well, there's literally a
I think, and
Scottish.
actually, I sorry, and I think most people this is one of the, I guess, this is my elitism coming out once again. I think most people would be perfectly happy with that.
Oh, okay. Well, I want to get into the elitism question and that political question soon, but just to point out, there's a Scottish economist called Mark Blyth who kind of got famous after the 2008 crash because he was sort of very critical of the way it was handled, and I think he predicted some of the problems. And he actually tried to visualize and imagine a universal basic income situation, and his justification for how it could go was literally based on what you just said, but he said it in a
Oh, really?
positive way. It was like, okay, well, everyone's using digital capitalist technologies, and that's creating money. So everyone's has a social media account. So basically, if you have a UBI and you're using social media, there's basically a kind of contract there that you're giving your attention. Well, you didn't say attention, but you're giving some sort of something to the machine which is producing money. So you should be get something back. So he sort of imagined the
But
contract based on that level.
can you imagine? Like, it would be nice. This
Yeah.
is, I don't know, I'm putting my communism cap on here. It
Uh,
would be nice if it was universal. But what I can imagine happening is that because people don't like equality very much, I can see a future where everyone is an influencer and everyone actually gets more um, more rewards in that basic income system for getting more attention in return for their attention. And so, you know how annoying it is when you see an influencer in the wild today. Imagine if that was the main job and motivation of every single person on the planet.
Yeah,
Oh my
if
goodness.
you walk down like a busy, like if you go to Rome or something and you just see all these people with these fucking cameras, like imagine that.
If you think we're in hell now, you haven't seen anything yet, man. This is gonna.
Well, I mean, I guess I just don't think most people have the personality type for that. I just think the people who have the personality type to be influencers, I think is actually, in a full sense, is actually probably a small.
But we're back to slop internet again. Like you're
Uh,
thinking about the cream of the crop here.
uh,
I'm thinking
fair.
most people are going to do just well enough to get by. And once again, just like every single invaded network, the quality is just going to go down and down and down and down. It's a
Yeah.
race to the bottom.
And AI is going to accelerate that too, because you can make like I keep seeing these videos of like a girl like okay, the girl's real. She's a content creator, but she's AI'd herself into like medieval England or like ancient
Hmm.
Rome, and she's walking around the streets like she's doing an influencer. Like, oh, I'm in, like she's gone to India and she's doing like a video blog, and she's like, oh, who are you? What do you do? Oh, you're a blacksmith. Wow. Next person like walks down the street, and I was looking at this video and I was like, this is insane. Like it's just literally, and of course it has millions or thousands, hundreds of thousands of views, you know. Um, so yeah, yeah, no, I can imagine that world, but it is a dystopia. It's a complete dystopia to me, I think, anyway. Um, okay, so I do want to. Okay, so maybe we'll talk a little bit about the. Well, I guess we could talk a little bit longer about the way in which the machine sort of starts to maneuver us. Okay, so I'll give you an example. I was watching Adam Curtis's documentary series recently. What's it called again? Can't Get You Out of My Head. And he does an episode where he
Mm.
talks about digital capitalism and stuff. And he mentions in that that well, he brings up a very good point, first of all, over the whole documentary, which is that meta narratives, whether they be political, religious, or historical, have dissolved in the past few decades into
Yeah.
these very, very individualized narrative. Everyone's got their little personal identity and personal space and personal narrative, and you've got a decentralization of meaning. Um, and this has sort of integrated itself into this global machine of communication. Now that's one point he made, which I thought was interesting. I thought I would just bring up. And the other one, and I suppose that's important for attention because it means our attention is no longer shared under like a collective object of
Right.
religious or political. Everyone's not going to the same political rally and saying, okay, we're all socialists and we're gonna listen to some great speech about the future of socialism, or they're going to the church and they're going to their attention is shared among the same sort of faith or whatever. It's dissolved into these little things. So that's one point I wanted to bring up. The other point was that one thing that Curtis mentioned in the documentary was Pokemon Go. Do you remember Pokemon Go?
Oh, it's like the kind of it's the smartphone game, but it kind of uses your camera, right? And you can see the
Yeah,
Pokemon in real life.
exactly. And apparently that was a conscious experiment in how can you literally get people through a game to like direct them towards something. So there was actually like restaurants and bars and cafes that were paying the Pokemon Go
No
people
way, really? All
to
along?
yeah, to
That's
actually
crazy.
they made
Okay.
advertising money off it to actually like not just advertise their cafe, say, will you put a Pikachu outside my restaurant? Because if you put a Pikachu
Yeah.
outside a restaurant and you're in a city, well, you're gonna get a lot of customers. Because they're
Damn.
gonna find the Pikachu and they're gonna go, oh, that was a good day Pokemon hunting, man. I could use a mojito or whatever. Like whatever. So yeah, so the I thought it was a good example
And it's
of
talk about being separated from labor value. It's not even like a Pikachu plushie doll, a physical thing you can take. It's like a
the
digital token. And it's not even like a real thing you can wear in real life. It's like a thing for your virtual character, right? I'm assuming.
I think I never played Pokemon Go, but I think you collect them. You get a Pokemon, you collect it in your
Right. But it's like a
Pokédex.
it's just I don't know, like I thought, lots of spiritual traditions talk about how physical like wealth is quite transient. In
Mm.
fact, incredibly transient. And now we don't even have that. We just have like digital Pikachus. And the Pokemon Go company could just delete your entire life in 1 second.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. 100%. Yeah. It's like I'm rich
What you were
because
actually what you were saying about the narrative thing is really interesting because um obviously, like you were saying, yeah, you would I mean ancient ancient medieval Europeans would, you go to the sermon on Sunday and you'd be told the village announcements and all this sort of, and in at least in English culture, I'm assuming it might be the same in Ireland, but I don't know. But that's how we have such good records of people back then because you would be recorded, your christening would be recorded in a big census book, and that's also why your taxation was so effective in those parts of the world as well. So very centralized system, but also very coordinated as a result. So there's pros and cons that come with that. But obviously, we have things like, well, TV networks, but also newspapers. And it's like, well, okay, you're a lefty, you might read a slightly different newspaper to the one I read, but it's the same news, but like presented in a different way.
mm,
And then obviously you get social media, and it's like, well, we were talking about X and Substack and those sorts of things. They're personalized to be like, okay, maybe Owen's a bit more interested in Irish politics, and Samuel's a bit more interested in in this, and it segments even further. But now we've got that mid-level knowledge generation. So it's not even going to be a curated feed. It's going to be an individual, I don't even know what to call it, a dream generation,
Mm,
uh, a news feature. I don't know what you would be like, but I can see a future where like why not? Why is there the news at 9? Why is there even the news on Twitter? Why is there not the news for Samuel and the news for Owen?
mm.
Like the news report generated for us. Why is there not, I don't know, like maybe there is a historical drama, but it knows that I would be more interested in this part of history and Owen would be more interested in this part of history. And Samuel's going to find these jokes more funny and Owen's going to find these jokes more funny. Why would it not be just completely made for us?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's ironically the kind of justification for intrusive marketing. People always say it's like, well, it helps you get what you want. It's easier. It's more targeted, you know?
Well, but I'm not saying it's as an emancipatory thing at all. I think it's,
Uh,
like we're social animals, and all this social technology has made us the least social we've ever been.
exactly. Exactly. I mean, if you look at, yeah, exactly. Like there's been an antisocial consequence of all these social technologies, which is something that people don't take seriously enough, you know. And I think it is because there isn't a kind of there aren't as many places of shared purpose, shared attention, shared purpose, shared meaning. It's like everything's been so individualized.
And this
Um,
is one of the conclusions in the book on the nature of desire. Desire, like many accidents of the human animal, desire is there for a reason, right? You'll agree, right? Like desire
mm,
for food is a natural thing. Like it makes sense if you didn't have desire for food, like the will for life would not propagate for very long, right? The will for sex is there for the same thing. The will for safety and a temperate environment and all that sort of stuff. It's all there for a reason. But all desire can be perverted and be hijacked, but also because we've been in such privation for the majority of all life ever, now that we're in this time of hyperabundance, whether it's hyperabundance of entertainment or sexual stimulation or calorific food and all this sort of stuff, we have no defenses against superstimulus. And
mm,
so this is one of the things I talk about a lot in the book, and it's that okay, all this stuff is kind of there to serve us, but it could also potentially destroy us. And one of
uh,
the emancipatory things is actually this is kind of where I lean on Marcus Aurelius and the Stoics in the book as well, is as a normative assertion, is that you should be aware of the fact that this attentive system wants you to give up and lean into supernormal stimulus. But
mm.
and this is where the wisdom of the ancients is actually useful because they knew 2000 years ago that this, give a man everything he wants. That's the best way to destroy him, right?
Yeah, 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 yeah. Exactly. Well,
And you
that's
have to look no you have to look no further than the fact that we've got so much nutrients around us, yet we're the most unhealthy we've ever been. We've got sex all around us, yet no one's having children. We've
mm,
got social media all around us, but no one's friends with anyone. There's no actual communities anymore.
yeah. Well, it's interesting. Like this abundance seems to be kind of almost ontologically distorted because it's like y- you've got this sort of feed of stimuli, but then again, the actual encounter with the things is less and less direct, if you get me.
Mm.
So it's like if it's dating apps, for example, it's like or porn, it's like you can constantly look at objects of desire, but actual encounters with a real object is increasingly distant. So
Mm.
there's a kind of weird sort of kind of de-worlding of
Yeah,
our the things we're drawn to. There's a kind of barrier being put up the whole time, even though you're
but
filled with abundance of it. Is a kind of
yeah,
weird sort of. Is it?
male libido is a great example of that, and the reason for that is because um, your brain and also your let's just say male machinery doesn't know the difference between pornography and a real woman, basically.
Okay, okay. So you're saying
There's no way for it to know. Let's just be honest. There's just no physical way it can know. Now, psychologically, you might have whatever feelings about this, but the actual machinery has no idea. As far as it's concerned, you are like a medieval king who's got a whole roster of, what do they call it? Like a harem of women on like rotation. You've
okay.
hit the evolutionary jackpot, right? And
It's a
so
kind of
as a result, people who do excessively consume pornography feel lethargic, and it's now a factor in about 60% of American divorces because, real sex with the real person is actually not, as far as the machinery is concerned, now psychologically and for the meaning of our lives, obviously there's importance to this, but as far as the machinery is concerned, the
mm,
supernormal stimulus is just incomparable to the real thing.
mm, yeah, yeah. I mean, eh, it's like it's like we are satiated by the virtual representation.
That's exactly it. And actually, capital likes us when we're satiated.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
perfect.
And like the existential part of me would always say, but it's not real, and it's not a real. I'm not encountering the real thing, and it's lacking kind of meaning and vitality and power. And that is true, I think. But there is clearly maybe another side to us, which is the kind of whatever the kind of neurological machinery you're talking about, which does sort of get, I don't really care, you know. I don't care if it's not real. I don't care about the existential distance that's being created from this object. It's like I have an abundance of I have a smartphone with a porn site. I have an
And
abundance, and
this
I'm
is actually
satiated.
one of the amazing insights I got from Schopenhauer. Schopenhauer describes the intellect, which is a stowaway on the will, by the way. It's not really like it's not doesn't directly benefit the will for us to have an intellect. He mentions it as a lightning crash. Because if you think about it, in terms of the history of the universe, but also the history of all things that have ever lived, the the number of animals that have like a prefrontal existentially aware cortex is very small and has only been present for a very very small time. It's a lightning flash, and actually one of the best things I kind of stole from Schopenhauer in his wording. He talks about the human brainstem as a parasite because
Yeah,
the
I
rest of
read
the
that
body
part.
is kind
I
of
know that
doing
part. I
its
think.
job, right? And like you said, there are ways to satiate all manner of our desires in a very, very convenient way. And
Mm.
existentially, that prefrontal cortex part knows there's something wrong and unfulfilling about this. But ultimately, and this goes for most people, once again, back to the elitism, they're perfectly fine just gliding through life with that.
Yeah, yeah. Dating apps is a really good example here because I remember when they first came out, I said to myself, "Oh, like this is like something that like a desperate middle-aged divorced person would use. There's no way
Uh-huh.
young people are going to use this. When you can just you go to your friends group, go to a bar, go to
Bit of a
what
pub, yeah.
go to the pub. When you like the weird thing about when dating apps were introduced is it wasn't like they were introduced during the lockdowns or something, and like no one was allowed to interact and go out, and it somehow was a way to do that. Like they were introduced when there was still plenty of people that were meeting other people in bars and in social groups and in sports clubs and all this stuff. It didn't. It wasn't like that had completely gone away and then this thing replaced it. It was like it replaced it from the inside, you know.
Yeah, uh-huh, uh-huh.
And
Yeah.
and that would tell you that actually the reason that that worked was because people were lazy. Like they were just they didn't care. They were like, well, this is just easier. I know it's
And there's a risk to meeting new people in meat space.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's much more convenient to make
Meat
it part of
space.
your to make it part of your doom scrolling every day, right? Just make it part of that. Why do I have to actually go and meet people?
Well,
Why
that's
do I
one.
have to put myself out and talk to that person who I work with? Why do I have to put myself out and ask that person, I don't know, at
Hmm.
my bowling club, I don't know, church or whatever? I don't
Yeah.
know. Ask that girl if they actually want to go out on a date or something. No, I can just do it this way. It's much more convenient. No anxiety. Once again, we're back to the feedback loop where the body likes to be in homeostasis, doesn't like
Yeah, yeah,
stress, wants to
yeah.
be satiated. It's really dark, and I wish there was more we could do about it, but I think the majority of the human race are perfectly okay with this state of affairs.
Well, that's it because it's like no stress, there's no social anxiety about it, there's no, and like the only thing that really can push you out of that and force you to just say, okay, I'm not going to take the easy way, I'm going to take the better way, really is a kind of moral conviction or an existential conviction about it just being better, it being realer, it being like you kind of have to become philosophical nowadays in order to basically like distance yourself from always taking the easier form of satiation, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah, I'm very pessimistic for, like I said, most people, but I feel like if you are at least thinking about these things, you probably have the inclination in the other direction. And it is, yeah, it's a that more than any, I would say more than anything you can politically tie yourself to, even probably. It's probably the biggest form of rebellion in the world today
Yeah.
is and it's not it's I don't think it's right to be like, okay, we're gonna all become monks, we're all gonna like become Luddites, because that's just like reactionary stuff that's not gonna get anywhere apart from being some sort of, I don't know, weird fringe thing. But
Mm.
one thing that's been really useful for me thinking about this, I didn't really write about this in the book as a normative suggestion, but I'll give it here because it's helped me. Whenever I engage with such things, now this can be the internet, which Zoom meetings I join, all this sort of stuff, or, how I use my smartphone. I try and ask myself, okay, am I the source of attention here? Am I just being harvested at this point? Because,
Okay. Mm.
it's very obvious when you're on X and you're just seeing these sloppy videos, you are being harvested, actively harvested. We're in a really extreme. Remember the whole, oh, if you don't know what the product is, you are the product, right? And it's like,
Mm.
okay, have my data, it doesn't really matter. But like now you are sapping the limited time I have on this existential coil, and I'm watching these stupid monkey videos.
Mm. Mm.
Some of them aren't even real; they're just AI generated, and it's like, okay, so it's an act of rebellion to take an intentional approach to these things. Like, really ask yourself: is this YouTube video serving me right now? Is what I'm posting serving me right now? Those sorts of things.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, the thing I sometimes get confused about is like, what's the machine or the capital machine or the digital machine? What like what's it getting from me by getting me to watch this stupid video? And I think, and obviously it's tension, but like, why is that valuable? And I think maybe because is it because the attention sets up a relational infrastructure between me as a consumer and the machine as a provider of something that I want, and then therefore it can then translate that into basically into clicks, into views, into money, into advertising, into so on and so forth. Like it's setting up an infrastructure, a cognitive infrastructure. Is that the point? Because it doesn't know if I'm going to buy anything or not, but doesn't or if it's going to actually like if I watch some slop videos, it's not necessarily translating into profit, but it is
Yeah, yeah.
translating into a cognitive relationship, which sets up the
I
infrastructure for profit.
Yeah, sure. I would push back with the assertion that thinking about what's being bought and what's being sold is a very 20th century way of looking at things.
Okay.
I think that for better or for worse, we're going to have to think about economics in a really radically different way moving forward.
Yeah.
And actually, if we don't ask these questions, then the decision's going to be made for us. Um, this is somewhere where actually Marx is very instructive because we are so alienated from our actual labor and capital that
Mm.
you're right. Like what is being produced or being valued at that point is so abstract. Um, but what's happening is, these tech companies have got huge investment and they hold huge capital. Just holding huge capital is almost enough to exist these days, pretty much.
Mm.
But more important than that is these algorithms have been told capture as much attention for as long as you can, and then also that there is value in the feedback that lost attention or the direction of that attention goes in. And we're in Nick Land world. We're in runaway capital. Like LLM's mid-level knowledge generation, that is an absolute earthquake when it comes to labor value. I totally agree. But the
Mm.
actual threat to exist, like to human existence, is whatever process is underlying those algorithms that is being told to just capture as much of our attention as possible. That's the actual distributed network that is replacing us existentially.
Yeah, because I mean, I suppose you could also argue that the the infrastructure of this cognition relations between us and the machines is
Yeah,
also like the value of it, the purpose of it may not even be apparent. Like it may have, it's setting it up, and it may use it for this, that, or that 5 years from now. You know, there's kind of multiple uses. Like one obviously is advertising, one is maybe political control, like one is um um just to yeah, I suppose there's a few different things I have in mind, but I suppose it could just be that it's doing this not even completely aware that this is the objective. It's just doing it because it sees a multitude of possible potentials with
yeah. And
the
you have
yeah.
to look no further than quite basic neural networks in computer science is actually they aren't told to do a certain thing. They're
Mm,
just given a fitness function and they're saying, okay, try and approximate this and fit this. And whatever the neural net does is just experimental and arranged as such to fit that function. It's not a deliberate algorithm, like designed algorithm.
mm.
And
So
actually, these algorithms and also these LLMs, they stopped being understood by us. How they work
mm,
exactly was not is no longer understood by us. People don't understand this. Like
that's
no one wrote LLMs.
yeah. That's why it's
They were given
scary.
certain parameters and were just they're in runoff. Well, that's we're already Nick Land's work is not a oh this is going to happen in the future.
Mm.
This is the future's here. It's happening. It's
Uh,
already happened.
future is now. Yeah, I really gotta understand Nick Land more. I suppose I just I see. I guess this is a good segue into the next thing I want to talk about, which was the resistance or the sense of regaining agency and so forth. Um, the reason I've avoided reading Nick Land so far is because I do think most Nick Landians who I've heard talk or promote Nick Land do tend to sort of um, kind of have an attitude where if you just embrace it all enough, I don't know, something eventually will happen, which is good.
Yeah,
So like I don't what? Like I don't know.
yeah.
It's like if I've got food poisoning, it's like I don't just keep eating the thing that's poisoning me until the point like
Yeah.
until something good happens. This is
That's
kind
kind of
of
where I got off the boat with accelerationism as well, right? I agree. Yeah, it's like the assertion that the end point of all of this is going to be some sort of good is a bit of a weird one to me, but yeah,
like I do agree that we can't just like step out of it in some simple sense, just rationally, but also the other argument, which is just like just give into it and then something good will happen. It's like I don't know. That's just it. Just seems like if you apply the same argument to any other relation or any other example of what we use in daily life, anything, it just doesn't make any sense. So there you go. But just to talk a bit about the because you mentioned stoicism, obviously, but also I was thinking of like basically forms of asceticism, where you're able to somehow take control of your relation to these cognitive infrastructure machines and so forth. Is this because like the question is like whose children are even going to be literate anymore in like 30 years, right? With
yeah,
all these machines which are doing your spelling for you and you need a certain amount of attention span in order to like learn to sit in a classroom and actually learn something to have an intellectual conversation or to get anything done. It seems that the destruction, the shortening and shortening and shortening, and the sort of manipulation of attention spans. Now that obviously this is bad for everybody, but I do think that children have a neuroplasticity kind of vulnerability to that, which adults maybe could be affected by it, like, but not as much. So there's a kind of a generational question here of like, well, what are human beings going to look like if this is this is the way things go for like another 50
yeah.
years?
What is yeah, it's strange, isn't it? Because everyone always laughs at I don't know, religious conservatives or maybe the Amish as, oh, look at those funny backwards people. But like you said, in 30 years' time, the only children who are going to know how to read are the Amish children.
Yeah.
And I mean, but you said it yourself earlier. You're like, well, if someone doesn't have some sort of moral conviction, they just get swallowed up in the attention era. And that's my assertion. I kind of don't really care where you get it from. I think the time to be, at least it was for me, the time for being a skeptic and being a bit of a philosopher is kind of over. I think we're going to enter um, a time of necessary dogmatism, perhaps.
Hmm.
Now, whether you think that's going to be an emancipatory thing or not, I don't know. I think that, at least in terms of the European, I guess I would widely call it the European civilization, where we're very much the children of the winter, and we should adjust accordingly. Now,
Well,
some people would call that a regression, morally and philosophically, perhaps, but I would argue that it seems to me, and this is the direction I'm planning in, is the way to have a meaningful life and to produce humans who are offspring who are actually human is to kind of lean in the other direction. Now, there's lots of routes to, like you said, having a moral conviction. But I think for Europeans, I don't think Christ is a bad start.
well, I was going to say like one of the only places left where it still is kind of socially shameful to just take your phone out and start scrolling through it is in a church.
Yeah,
Like it's one of the only places left. If you go to a mass and you take your phone out and you start scrolling through it, people will look at you and be like what are you doing? Like, well, you could basically do that in any other social setting today, and like no one will care. So that does say a lot. Um, yeah, I mean, in terms of like, so I was gonna say Australia. Australia has banned social media for under 16s. So you already see some countries beginning to notice these stuff and sort of create legislation to push back. Um, I don't know if how many other countries will follow in suit. I have a feeling that over time, many of them probably will, because it is quite notable. I mean, people raising kids today, if they don't have any sort of safeguards in place, you probably are going to notice that this kid is really not as good at reading and writing as you were when you were their age.
yeah.
That's not, you know.
It's yeah. To be completely like fair, as I'm not I'm not like a Jordan Peterson who's going to go out here and say this is what you need to do to sort yourself out to pick yourself up because I kind of don't know. I'm still kind of trying to work that out myself. But looking towards non-ephemeral things, looking towards spiritual things has been very useful. There are many paths to do this. I mean I have my own inclination and um, my own my own feeling about what is the truth. But there are many ways to do that, and if you're inclined that direction, I would um, say that's probably a good way to start moving. And I would say move in that direction in meat space. Do not get sucked into people who think they're orthodox on Twitter. Basically, I wouldn't suggest that.
Yeah, kind of LARPy,
Yeah,
LARPy.
exactly. This has to be like a real thing, and you have to go and deal with the messiness of being part of an actual body of people as well. That's
Mm.
a big part of it. And what follows from that is probably the messiness of having a real life meat space family and all that sort of stuff. But what I would say is that although it feels like it today, we're not alone. There have been many people of our inclination who have lived before us, and a lot of them wrote very, very instructive things down.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. But it does seem like the starting point is to sort of say, because you mentioned the spiritual side, the religious side. It seems like the starting point is to just acknowledge that there is something more important or beyond the very immediate sort of transactions of stimulation and pleasure that I experience on a day-to-day
Yeah,
level.
because frankly, if you take the other position philosophically, then you are a fungible economic unit.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And okay, maybe that's the truth, but I think I'm going to have a much more meaningful life if I believe the other thing.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Because I mean, like you do have to kind of catch yourself. Like, oh, I'm doom scrolling. There's got to be something better to do. Okay. I mean, like that might sound like a very simple, rational realization, but in some level, there is a kind of like existential or even transcendental claim there in that realization. You're sort of saying this may sort of give me an immediate stimuli of comfort, or it kind of hypnotizes me, makes me feel safe or something. Um, but that's right, not that. But that's not. But that's just really not how I should be living. That like I'm not connecting myself to something real or good.
Yeah, well, Stoics talked about this, but Christian scripture talks about this a lot. Um, we all have some sort of sense about what is right and what's going to improve us, and you know, frankly, no one has ever said, no one has ever said, "Oh, I really regret working out, starting to work out. I really regret getting into shape. I really regret quitting pornography. Or I really regret that I didn't spend more time on Instagram last night."
Hmm. Yeah, yeah,
No one's
yeah, yeah,
ever said that.
yeah, yeah.
Wisdom is right in front of our face, and you just have to do something about it. And if you don't do something about it, you're part of the cattle. Have fun.
Mm, mm.
This
Well,
is
let's.
not, this conversation is not for you. This book is not for you.
Well, then
Go and
let.
enjoy the slop, people.
Well, then let's talk about the elitist thing because um that does seem to be that there is a kind of new and actually I think I wrote something or I mentioned something on Twitter recently and I said so literacy really 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 was like a big dividing line in social hierarchy for a long time, right?
Yeah.
And then as mass literacy took over, Emmanuel Todd, who's a French historian, has made this argument that it was really, really like mass literacy that made a huge difference to push societies more towards equality. Um, but then, if you're looking at a kind of new era of digital technologies, and then you're looking at this, you're looking at like, okay, everyone's literate in some basic sense, but some people are just eating slop all day and being fungible, manipulable, the kind of passive consumers within this kind of peculiarly dystopian kind of cognitive infrastructure. And then it's like, okay, so what's the new dividing line? Because it's not literacy in the
Yeah.
simple sense.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
It's maybe a kind of method of dealing with these
I,
technologies, right? That might be the new dividing line of up and down.
I I have a part in the book. It's very much kind of a side chapter, but I think it's very relevant to this topic. Is I've got
Mm.
a chapter. It relates to utopia and kind of like the sort of people that would live in a utopia, the sort of people who want utopia. Back to the topic of cattle and those sorts of things.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and there's a chapter on what I call is emojification. And
Emojification, like emojis.
emojification, yeah. And this is a very like I make some very broad pronouncements, which is why I call the book a polemic. Okay, I understand you can definitely poke a lot of problems in my overarching assertions about history and those sorts of things, but I do think there is something to be said about the development of language and how it ties into where we've ended up in the attention era.
Mm.
Um, because writing started with very pictorial writing, but was for commerce for merchants, and then there was more poetic forms, and then we have more complex writing that transcended bureaucratic and commercial means, and we have poetry and
Mm.
not like novels and all those sorts of things happen, and then we I guess you could say regressed. I'm not even sure what if you would say a regression, but we went back into okay, shorter form. Now we have essays, we have short novels. Okay, now we have short postings, things like Twitter or Substack and those sorts of things. And then we've gone one step further, and I would argue that the majority of communication actually done by the populace today is through emoji or
Mm.
things that are equivalent to emoji. That can be like GIF responses, memes, those sorts of things. And what emoji essentially the rub is that they basically give a general affect. And this ties deeply into cybernetic praxis because
Mm.
a thumb up emoji or a rolling on the floor laughing emoji. It gives a general, some sort of measurement to the positive. I like this thing, or that's good, like a affirmative, or one is like more negative, maybe with some kind of basic emotional affect or something like this. But
Mm.
for most communication between most people, that's actually sufficient.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, it's
Literacy was almost forced on people by the school system.
yeah, 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 yeah.
Most people probably wouldn't choose it. Back to what we want and what we need. But also, I think most people really don't need it, and I think emojis are just fine.
Well, I also think one of the reasons that that mass literacy became a thing was because centralized systems of power wanted people to work in industries too, and you do need at least a basic level literacy to work in
Yeah.
in
And
industries.
how can you choose which product you want in the supermarket if you can't read the labels? It's very
Well,
important.
that's another good one. So they were sort of, I guess you could almost say that the kind of the basis of mass literacy to begin with was already a little bit like it was like it didn't have as much of an ethical standard as we like to pretend it did. It
I
was
think there's probably a thread to that. I think a lot of people, at least in Western culture, probably wanted people to read the Bible. I think
oh yeah, that was also a
a
good
big
point.
part of
Yeah.
it. But
Yeah.
you're right. I don't think the economic driving force definitely wasn't. And I think obviously
Mm.
lots of things start with a nice seed, a good intention, but they quickly mutate into something monstrous and hideous.
Well,
And
because it's a lot of effort to get people to like I remember being in school and like every day and like the bloody I think it's a lot of effort to get children to learn to read and write. You know, we take it for granted because it's just part of the modern world. We all go to school, we all do it, and we can sit in the classroom for 6 hours a day and we learn how to do it. But actually, if you go to like a medieval peasant society, who has time to sit there with a group of children and like force them to do these
yeah,
exercises and read this and say this and then speak it out loud and do this? We take it for granted because we have a modern education system which basically just does that for hours a day, like most of the, like 9 months out of the year.
yeah. And it's like in school, it's like, okay, today's activity is you need to write a letter to your favorite celebrity or something. And no one writes a letter. No one writes a letter. That just doesn't happen.
Mm,
No one writes a letter. It just doesn't happen. And what I'm saying about emoji being okay, good for most people, sounds a little bit ridiculous, but just look at the majority of communication people do. Most communication people do today um, is actually not individual to individual. It's directly into the attention algorithm. And
mm,
it is by via means of a like button
mm, mm,
or, just a click, a view.
mm.
That's how most people hook into the attention economy right now. And, that's even more simple than emoji. That's just like and dislike or ignore and watch.
You know, even dislike is being eliminated. If you look at YouTube, you can't see dislike.
Right. Yeah,
Like,
used to have two bits of communication. You could do
you only got
two
one.
ones and zeros. You could do either not watch or a like or an unlike. Now you've literally just got one bit of bandwidth that you can communicate with.
Yeah. Do you know who's a good example of this too? Is Trump because Trump people study Trump's language and he uses really really simple language.
Uh-huh.
And I'm not saying that to be like, oh, all the supporters are dumb. I'm not, like I don't think like there's plenty of supporters that like Democrats are dumb. Um, but if you look at old speeches from old famous political figures, or not even old, but just even like going back like 30 years or longer before that, so there's like they kind of try to use more complex language. They try to use more poetic
And they would
language.
they would drop in literary references, references to classics, and these sorts of things. Yeah, yeah.
Mm. Play with words, use ambiguous terms, emotive. But with Trump, it's very much like it's very direct in a very kind of simple sense. So you already see the effect of that, and there's a reason that's effective. I think if you put Trump's rhetorical style back in like a society 100 years ago, I don't think people would take him that seriously. You
And
know?
I think we get to one of the normative assumptions I do make in the book, and it's one I've been thinking about for a long time, has been in a lot of my writings. I think it's for most people a very dark one, but I think it's true. That's why I'm saying it. Is that for most people, freedom is bad. Freedom is really, really bad. It's bad for them, their body, their soul, and it makes them do horrible things. Like freedom is really bad. People do best when they're in chains, I think, when they're given like a certain remit. And, the decline in political quality and also just the quality of government and just everything to do with the competency, it just all lines up with for like greater expansion of emancipation, like in terms of democratic voting power to more people. And it also is just perfectly in line with the demographic changes to Western countries. Just
Mm,
all lines up. And that's not. I'm sorry. Like if it quacks, it's a duck.
okay, yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I don't think it's not an enjoyable experience for most people to have to go to a voting booth and have their. I don't think most people don't enjoy watching the news. It's not enjoyable to them. I don't know
Mm,
why we would make them do it.
mm. Well, I mean, Rousseau, I think, one time said, "You have to be forced to be free. Freedom doesn't come from this pleasant choice. It's like something that is in
That's
some sense."
kind of what liberalism is. Like most
Yeah.
people clearly don't want freedom. Why are we giving it to them?
But I would only push back against that to say I may not know what I want until I encounter it. Do you know? Like as a child, like I may just want to eat sweets and play PlayStation all day, but if my teachers and parents make me do these boring things like learn stuff and well, okay, in the moment I don't see the value of it, but in the long run I'm grateful there was a someone to sort of put to kind of force upon me this.
That is not a pushback against my point. That is in total agreement with it. You
Yeah.
did better because you were in chains.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
What you
Yeah,
want is not what you need. They're completely different things.
yeah,
And
yeah.
this, unfortunately, this goes for children as well as for adults.
Hmm.
Unfortunately, it's the same. Like, there's no fun. There's no um, metaphysical difference between a human, the child and an adult in that sense. Like most adults act like children in that regard, and what they want is not what they need.
Yeah, but see, the problem is it makes sense with a child, but excuse me, but with adults, you see, the problem is like the authorities or the that are sort of that are taking responsibility and putting you and making sure you learn to read and write and don't eat sweets all day. Those authorities will get old and die, and they need to be replaced. And that's the problem with like that's the real reason why there is a distinction between adults and children. It's not because one is always smart and right and one is always wrong. It's because there needs to be a replenishment of those authorities to
Yeah,
take
100%,
responsibility.
100%, yeah.
And that's
And
the real,
hence why I'm saying elitism and not just like all humans are worthless. Like
yeah, yeah, okay,
there's
fair
some
enough.
that have an inclination and an ability to do this. I mean,
Mm.
now I would also add that clearly need a circulation of elites in some sense because there's something wrong in the state of Denmark, but that is a separate issue, I think.
Yeah, but I think a lot of the problem is that we haven't had this circulation. We've sort of delayed the circulation for so long that you're having these problems where people are now really just going, oh well, what if people don't learn to read and write? What if people just eat slop all day or we just live in a pod? Like, I do think those two things are very connected. Um,
Right.
but anyway, the last thing we didn't talk about was the eugenics stuff.
Yeah.
How does eugenics intention like where's the crossover there? I mean, obviously I see it. It's things like dating apps, obviously, but like,
Yeah. Mhm. I mean, I think it actually deeply ties into the philosophical underpinnings. Obviously, the will as thing itself that we experience through the body. The most important part of that is the will to live.
mm,
That's what drives us to sustain ourselves, whether it's consuming things or keeping ourselves safe or being aggressive towards other things. Loads of things tie into that. But probably, I I think Schopenhauer would say this. I think that's what I get from his writings. You could have a debate on that. I don't think it's really important. But I would say, I would definitely put forward that actually the most um, powerful of such desires, particularly for men, is the sexual desire. And I don't know, you don't have to look much further than what the algorithm does serve to a man to capture his attention,
Mm,
um, to notice that. And so that did get me thinking about because Schopenhauer talks a lot about okay, well, there's the will to live, which is the will to sustain yourself, but even more important is the will to propagation. There is a will, underlying will to propagation as well. Those things go side by side. If you don't have the will to live and you don't have the will to propagate, you just don't exist. You stop existing very quickly, right?
okay, yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and so that's what kind of made the question of sex very important to this study. Um, and naturally, I was thinking about, well, okay, we have this, there's a lot in the book about pornography and the perversion of such an impulse. That's fine. That's all interesting stuff. But the second layer to that is, okay, what is that mechanism exactly? I mean, I mentioned already the will to propagate. It's like, well, propagation is all, this is something I got from reading the original eugenesis when I did the research for this book, is that whatever your opinion about evolution and propagation is, and it actually even agnostic of whatever the biological particulars are of that, I think we all agree that like begets like. It just has to be true in some sense. Um, and so as a result, I was thinking, well, okay, like begets like. There's got to be something which, some sort of nature which passes itself on. And then naturally, I was thinking, okay, well, there is this thing of, like once again, one of the problems with academic philosophy is it has inherited a lot of the um, bugbears of the, I guess, post-war liberal culture that we've
Mm,
spoken about already. And it has this weird reaction to such a thing as eugenics. And the excuse for this is what happened um, with the Germans in the middle of the century.
mm,
Um, Now, this is interesting because it's despite the fact that many states in the US and also the Scandinavian countries and the UK actually had eugenical laws way into the late 20th century.
mm.
But we can't talk, that's not even important. I feel like that might be the next study. I don't know yet. That's kind of like, okay, that's the general consensus on the topic of eugenics right now, right? General consent. Generally, people are pretty apprehensive to talk about it. They don't want to talk about it. It's definitely one of the sacred cows, like the real sacred cows, not the sort of sacred cows that the anti-woke crowd go against. It's one of the actual sacred cows. The assertion that there is absolutely no moral good that can come out of any conversation about eugenics.
Mm.
Naturally, I would push back against that. Now, I don't have a particularly positive view of a hard eugenics, of course, but it I think if you want to look at things honestly, philosophically, you push back against that. The other camp is very strange. There's kind of like a weird, very niche, but very pro eugenics crowd. They're generally pretty liberal, actually quite liberal minded people, but they sort of see what's happening with demographic change and they have a natural revulsion. I don't think they really understand why they have such a revulsion. But basically, they're the sort of people who think, oh, I'm the sort of person who should be propagated. So therefore, it's good. All this sort of stuff.
Mm,
I don't take either of those positions. I don't think it's remotely interesting. I think both are far too moralistic, not really encountering the thing as it is. My position is one of eugenical realism. The fact that like begets like is just true. The fact that we have a will to propagate is just true.
mhm,
Um, Therefore, whether we think it's extremely positive and we should propagate ourselves, or whether we think it's the greatest evil ever done by the human race, eugenics is happening anyway. Even in our hyper moral society, which really hates any talk of eugenics, eugenics is happening right now. Like, that's the assertion of eugenical realism. And some examples I can give is everything you do is a practice of eugenics. Like, the job you choose is a practice of eugenics. Where you go to study is a practice of eugenics. Where what neighborhood you live in is a practice of eugenics. The food that you feed yourselves and your children, it's all a practice of eugenics. Like, these are all you'd be a fool to say that, oh, you're going to meet the same person no matter what neighborhood you move to. It's just
mm.
ridiculous. Like,
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
this
yeah.
thing is happening anyway, and you know demographics are shifting anyway. So my assertion is not that we should take some heavy-handed moral position. Is that we need to finally come to terms with this thing.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. But I mean, the whole birth
So,
gap.
so I'm not really actually putting forward any radical proclamation here. I just
Okay.
want us to have a clean slate with it philosophically, and also to accept the fact that this is going to happen whether we like it or not. Therefore, we must engage with it.
Well, the whole birth gap issue kind of suggests that, right? That there's a reason people are so many people en masse. Obviously, different individuals have their own personal reasons, but why so many people en masse, like worldwide, are sort of reluctant to
But
reproduce? It's like,
here we go. You're saying that like it's everyone doing it. It's not actually. It's people like us. It's educated, middle class, Western or Westernized people. That's why it's such a big thing in places like Korea, which are pretty financially and like commercially well off. It's happening in Western countries, but it's happening among the middle rung of people. One of the craziest things about the birth gap, and people should keep this in mind, it's not that people are having less children. Statistically, it's because more people are having no children. That
mm,
is eugenics. Because
okay.
that does not affect all classes equally. It does not affect all so-called races equally.
Well, then
Like there's
what?
very obvious certain groups that this affects, and there are
Yeah.
certain groups which are having no children.
No, no,
That's eugenics. It's just happening.
I agree. I think there's two sort of commonalities which you can look at, which seem to always correlate to people having less or no children. It's education level and
Yeah.
an environment. It's not always that they're personally rich, but they're in an environment of affluence to some degree or another. Could be their
Uh-huh.
parents, could be just the society they're in. It could be they're not always like personally, but there's some sort of environment of abundance plus educational level. And the
Mhm.
education level is more personal. It's more like how far they've conceived of themselves to be educated and so on. So it's like those two things seem to be the factors which people don't. So it's like, what's wrong with? I mean, the question I sometimes ask myself is like, what's happening within those social groups that are abundant and educated, which is stopping
Yeah.
them or making them resist or creating the conditions for resistance to
And
uh,
actually, here's a white
propagation?
pill if you happen to be on the the right wing of anything.
Uh,
Generally, the populations who are selecting themselves out of the gene pool happen to be leftists,
mm, yeah.
overwhelmingly leftists and liberals.
Yeah. And it tends to be more religious people who are having children, right?
Yeah, coming back to the needing a spiritual or moral foundation. Yeah,
Yeah. There
escape
you
all
go.
this. Just I don't know. Just if it quacks, it's a duck. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's weird because we always associate religion with like this sort of, I mean, it's probably false to do this, but in my lifetime, religion has always been by atheists, and so it's always been associated with it's kind of very kind of like life rejecting moralism, you know? It's
Yeah, yeah.
kind of Nietzschean view of it, but Nietzsche's attack on Nietzsche's attack wasn't on just specifically religious people; it was on something much more broader. But but there just seemed to be this assumption. Then I'm like looking around, I'm going, oh wait, it's the it's the it's the religious people that are like living life. They're propagating whatever. So
Well, and also this is tangential, but related is that um, people with a dogmatic religious identity are overwhelmingly more happy in self-reporting studies
okay,
and more
interesting.
fulfilled in life with
Mm,
their place in life.
mm.
This is very off topic, but it's fascinating. It's really fascinating. And
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know. It says a lot. If you're looking, if you're like, oh, how can I escape this mess? Well, I'm sorry. There's many people have done it before, and you've got to bite your skeptical lip a little bit and just plunge into the water.
Yeah. But would you include, just to get back to the topic of Geneticism, would you also include that? I mean, are you speaking just directly of biological production, or are you including? Because when I think of it, I often always think of more like mimetic forces of character. You know, it's like
Yeah,
who do
yeah,
we present to the society as being admirable? Who's got the who's influencing the sort of moral development and social
yeah,
development of other people? I would also include that into the
yeah. That's excellent question. I would definitely include it. it's out of the scope of this study. Um, the main point of bringing up eugenics in this study is to bring forth the idea of eugenical realism, the fact that these two moral positions are not particularly useful,
Mm,
because they don't account for the fact that this is happening anyway. Like it
mm,
doesn't, we don't get to turn the eugenics button off, on or off.
mm.
It's always on. It's part of the will. It's part of the propagation of life. It just happens.
Yeah,
Why?
yeah.
Why do we? I mean, we selectively breed animals all the time. Like, why do we think that our capital overlord is not doing the same thing with us? I don't know. It's just.
Is it? I mean,
But you're right. I think you're right though. You're right in terms of you shouldn't. Yeah, it. We need a complete reassessment and to start asking questions about okay, what is in what degree is this like biological and to do with those sorts of traits, and how is it to do with like character and character forming, and how do we propagate a culture which would be beneficial for us? Those are all tertiary questions which I think would be really useful to ask in a landscape where we've completely demolished the other two positions.
yeah, yeah. And and because it does seem that the contradiction of like religious people who seem kind of prudent or moralistic, that they're the ones kind of engaging in life production. The sort of contradiction could be understood more if you think about it in terms of like they have a sense of moral cultivation. They've held on to it. And maybe if you have a sense of moral cultivation, it means that there's a kind of form to give the matter. Speaking like Aristotelian terms, there's a kind of, it's like, okay, you're gonna have a kid, but it's like, well, like it's not like all the people not having kids are all sterile or something. It's like they're not doing perhaps they're not doing it, but they don't have a kind of moral form to give that person's life. They don't have a sort of, like something to transmit that person of like culture, character. That's just speculation.
Oh, no, no, that's yeah. I mean, and then we're once again back to well, okay, people who are very deracinated, liberal, left-minded people living in, I don't know, the polycule, the polyamorous communities. They're
Yeah,
all the
yeah.
ones who have the highest like reported mental health problems, and they have the negative opinions of themselves. And it's like, well, yeah, I wouldn't want to reproduce either if I thought those things about myself.
Because there's a theorist I really like called Olivier Roy, and he's a French guy, and I've done a video on my channel about it, one of his books, but he's done a lot of studies on Islamic terrorism, and
Hmm.
he says that it's not the most fundamentally like traditionalist Islamists who become
Yeah,
the terrorists. It's the third, fourth gen or second, third, fourth generations normally who live in educated and either in Western environments or they're kind of part of the educated classes in the Middle East, but they're sent to like London University, whatever, and they feel and they often don't speak the language of their grandparents and they
yeah,
feel separated from the language and the culture of their past, and they sort of react against that trend, and they're sort of angry at their parents for not transmitting the culture. And I kind of wonder if there's nothing to transmit, if we're sort of in this cultureless, deracinated environment of just and there's nothing to transmit. I wonder if that is the thing that's kind of causing people to say, well, what's the point in existing? What's the point in propagating? Like we need a form.
yeah,
We need form.
yeah. And it's yeah, really. That's. I mean, maybe that's why the people who are so blindly positive about all the fruits of Anglo-Western culture return to tradition lot. Maybe that's why they're all kind of like half European and the other half is from India or something.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
The most rabidly trad are like, not fully European.
Well, that's another question. That now
Because
Europe
that,
is
yeah.
is is
Because
is
I think a lot of the Islamist terrorists, they have like, they're half European, half Arabic or something, right? Like,
yeah, I don't know the exact like statistics on it, but it's a misnomer by a lot of people to say it's just a result of like superstitious theocratic religiousness.
no,
It's not. It's
they're
it's not.
usually,
It's
yeah,
this
they all
weird middle
usually
ground.
have degrees and master's degrees and stuff. They didn't, yeah, like really, yeah, yeah.
One of the actually, I was watching a video on Academic Agent's channel recently about the whole Iran thing, and he was describing some of the leaders in Iran, and he was like, "Yeah, that guy has a PhD in Kant. That guy has a PhD
Yeah,
in."
that blew my mind. I can't remember
Yeah.
the guy's name, but yeah, he's like an actual scholar.
Yeah, yeah.
And then you know, look at the top brass of the Western countries.
Uh,
It's like
they're
just
like,
absolutely, if they have a degree, like, you know, Trump's, I can't remember the chap's name, but the guy who was on reality, well, Trump himself is a reality TV star. His top military guys from reality TV as well. You don't have to look much further than some of the European leaders to be like, oh, they did like, I don't know, business management
business
degree.
management.
Oh,
Yeah,
wow. And then, you know, we've got
technocratic.
some absolute Kantian Chad who's leading the Iranian military. Like, guys, you're
Yeah.
not help. I want to choose your side, guys. You're not helping me.
I was joking the other day. I was like, yeah, those military bases in the Gulf, yeah, they look like good targets. But what about Hollywood? Do you ever just want to just
Yeah.
send a few rockets over towards Hollywood because the
Well,
crap
it's
films that
bizarre
they
how
put out.
like the US could actually bomb some of its own cities and be like it would be a net positive
Yeah, I know. Yeah, yeah.
for their war effort.
Yeah. Okay. How long have we been speaking for? Nearly two. Is there any other topic you wanted to cover before we finish up,
No,
or?
I just wanted to say that, you know, like all of my books, this one was about two-thirds longer when I finished it. It is a result of a deep contemplation and also deep research of the texts. You can look in the bibliography, you know, I've got Stoics, I've got the important stuff that Schopenhauer wrote. I've got a lot of the original British eugenicists in there. It's all very important stuff, but it is condensed down. There is value to long tomes of philosophy, but my writing style has always lent itself to being um, less verbose, and as a result, you know, you have a polemical book with short, punchy chapters, but a good philosophical and academic backbone there. And you know, you can read a chapter very quickly on a bus journey or something, or when you're on the subway, and have something to think about, and then come back to the book. Or if you want to read it all in one go, you could do that. So um, yeah, it's much more accessible than most other philosophy, I think, and you know, it's polemical. It's an interesting read. It's got some spicy parts.
Yeah. I definitely thought it was definitely. I could feel the schizo vibes in it, the schizo like topics we did about like these various because it's like a kind of a study of dystopia nearly. It's there's a at least it
Well,
could
and
be.
I feel like what we did on Schizo was a perfect window into dystopia. Yeah. So
Yeah,
there you go.
exactly. Yeah, exactly. Okay. I'll put the links in the description for people anyway. Let me just